This is Mr. Eugene, and today we're discussing something that over half of married men have experienced at some point, but almost none of them will say out loud: the quiet, creeping regret of realizing they married the wrong woman, or worse, that the institution of marriage itself was never what they were sold on. This is the buyer's remorse that nobody talks about. The one that doesn't just hurt for a season and pass. The one that settles in deep, that you carry with you every single day, that you wake up with and go to sleep with and can't shake. Because unlike a bad car purchase or a disappointing house, there's no simple exit strategy that doesn't cost you everything you've built. Let me start with something that will resonate with any man who grew up before the internet made instant consumer research possible. When I was young, advertising was an art form built entirely on deception. You'd see something in a magazine or a comic book, some toy, some gadget, something that captured your imagination completely, and the advertising was designed to make it look like the most magnificent version of itself. The photograph was perfect, the description was glowing, your imagination filled in every gap with the best possible scenario, and then you saved up weeks of whatever a kid does to earn money. You sent your hard-earned cash in an envelope and you waited, and waited, and waited some more. And when that package finally arrived, you opened it with hands that were practically shaking with anticipation. And what was inside bore almost no resemblance to what you were sold. That is buyer's remorse in its purest form, the gap between the promise and the reality, between what the marketing told you to expect and what you actually got. And I'm telling you, there is no buyer's remorse in human experience that comes close to marrying the wrong woman. Not a car, not a house, not any financial decision you've ever made. Because with those decisions, however bad they are, there's always a path out that doesn't require dismantling your entire life to walk through. With a bad marriage, by the time you realize what you've got, you're already in so deep that getting out looks more terrifying than staying. You're looking at the door that slams shut behind you and realizing it locks from the other side. And before we get into this, let me tell you why this conversation needs to happen openly and honestly. Because a survey I came across revealed that over 50% of married men have experienced significant regret about their decision to marry at some point in their marriage. Over half. That's not a niche problem. That's not the exception. That's the majority of married men at some point sitting with the thought, I'm not sure this was the right decision. And society essentially tells these men to suffer in silence, to honor their commitment, to work harder on the marriage, to be better husbands, all while the fundamental reality that modern marriage is often a poor deal for men and that many men sense this but walked in uninformed goes completely unaddressed. This channel exists to address what nobody else will address honestly, so stay with me. Today we're examining why so many men regret marriage, what creates that regret, and why the marriage promise rarely matches the marriage reality. The locked door. Let me start with the experience of realizing you've married the wrong woman, because it's distinct from most other forms of regret in one critical way. By the time you realize it, you're already trapped. Think about what that actually feels like. You've walked through a door that closed and locked behind you. You turn around and realize there's no handle on your side. The door that looked like an entrance to the rest of your life now looks like the wall that contains it. That combination of panic and pragmatism that hits you in that moment is unlike anything else. Because you can't just admit the mistake and walk away. You can't take it back to the store. You can't sell it at a loss and start over without enormous cost. You're in a structure that you helped build, surrounded by evidence of the investment you've made, with children who depend on the structure remaining intact, and assets that are now jointly owned by someone who may not agree that the structure is failing. That's the trap of marrying the wrong woman. And it's why men carry the regret silently for years. Because expressing it leads nowhere useful, because the cost of exit is so catastrophically high that most men can't bring themselves to pay it, and because society has essentially no support or sympathy for men in this position. The autonomy tax. The first source of regret that hits men, often before they've even registered any specific problem with their wife, is the loss of autonomy. And this one affects even men in reasonably good marriages because it's not about the woman specifically, it's about the institution and what it demands from men structurally. Before marriage, a man's time is his own, his decisions are his own, his money is his own, his Friday night is his own, his Sunday morning is his own. If he wants to stay out, he stays out. If he wants to stay in, he stays in. If he wants to spend money on something he values, he spends it. If he wants to change plans at the last minute, he changes them. Marriage ends all of that. Not dramatically, not overnight, but gradually and comprehensively. Suddenly, every movement requires accounting for. You're checking in, checking out, giving notice, seeking permission without it being called permission, or simply bringing her along whether that's what you wanted or not. Men don't fully appreciate what they're giving up until it's gone. Because you don't miss autonomy when you have it. You only feel its absence when it's been taken. And the man who could once make any decision spontaneously, who owned his own time completely, discovers within the first year or two of marriage that he is now fundamentally accountable to another person's preferences, moods, schedule, and priorities for essentially every aspect of his daily life. They call it the ball and chain as a joke. It's only half a joke, because every man who's been married for a few years knows that there's real weight there. Not because the woman is necessarily unreasonable, but because the structure of marriage itself creates obligation that doesn't coexist well with the male need for independence and self-direction. The friction that wears you down. Even in marriages that aren't catastrophically bad, there's an ongoing friction that most men were completely unprepared for. Living in close proximity to another human being with different preferences, different standards, different priorities, and different tolerances creates low-level stress that accumulates over years into something genuinely exhausting. Marriage requires a level of emotional maturity that most young men don't realize they'll need when they commit to it. It requires the ability to manage your own frustrations, to compromise without resentment, to maintain patience through disagreements, to regulate your responses to someone who has constant access to you and therefore constant ability to irritate you. When both people develop this emotional maturity together, there's a chance. When one person, and experience suggests it's often her, doesn't prioritize this development, what you get is constant friction, pushback on decisions, criticism of behavior, nagging about things that feel trivial to you and apparently matter enormously to her, a running commentary on how you do things, how you don't do things, what you should be doing differently. And this friction, over years, does something specific and damaging to men. It erodes self-esteem. Not quickly, not visibly, but steadily. You're made to feel that you're always slightly wrong, always falling slightly short, always failing to meet a standard that somehow keeps shifting. And a man who feels perpetually inadequate in his own home is a man who has lost something fundamental that's very difficult to get back. The role you never auditioned for, then there's what marriage actually requires you to become. The role of husband carries expectations that aren't clearly articulated before you sign up for them. They emerge gradually through the normal operation of domestic life, until one day you look up and realize you've been assigned a job description that nobody showed you before hiring. You're the provider, financially, emotionally, practically. You're the errand runner, the handyman, the heavy lifter, the bill payer, the lawn keeper, the car maintainer. You're the one who's supposed to anticipate needs before they're expressed, the one who should. Just know what needs doing without being asked. You're the emotional anchor expected to remain stable while she navigates whatever emotional weather she's experiencing. And here's what compounds this. Women are nesters. This is simply true. Every woman has a vision of what her home should be, how it should look, how it should feel, what it should say about her to anyone who enters it. The home is an extension of her identity in ways that it simply isn't for most men. For men, a house is functional space. It meets needs. It provides shelter and comfort. It doesn't need to be a curated representation of your inner life. For women, it absolutely does. And the standards for maintaining that vision, the cleanliness requirements, the decorating decisions, the constant upgrading and refreshing and adjusting, these become your standards too, whether you wanted them or not. Because living in that house means either meeting her vision or living with the consequences of not meeting it. And the consequences are friction, resentment, criticism, and the particular form of domestic misery that comes from being made to feel like a failure in your own home. The financial reality men love financial independence, the ability to direct your own earnings, to make your own financial decisions, to pursue your own financial goals without having to justify or negotiate or compromise. This is deeply important to most men, and marriage removes it. Suddenly, your financial priorities must coexist with her financial priorities, and those priorities often don't align. You're trying to build savings, invest for the future, maintain financial discipline. She's decorating the house, booking the vacation, upgrading the car, purchasing things whose value you genuinely cannot comprehend, but which apparently are essential to her vision of how this life should look. And here's where it gets particularly difficult. This isn't usually a conversation where both parties present their financial priorities and negotiate a rational middle ground. It's a negotiation where the emotional weight of her desires and the relationship friction that comes from disappointing those desires creates enormous pressure to simply comply, to let the vacation happen, to let the redecorating happen, to let your financial goals slide to the back burner because the alternative is conflict that makes your home life miserable. And some men will say, just hold the line, establish boundaries, don't allow it. That's easy advice to give. It's much harder to live when holding that line means living with the emotional consequences of a woman who feels her needs aren't being met every single day in the space you share. At some point, many men make the quiet calculation, it's easier to just let her spend the money than to fight about it every time. And their financial futures erode one compromise at a time. The emotional exposure. Here's one that catches men most completely off guard, the emotional vulnerability that comes with a marriage that starts deteriorating. When you marry a woman, you open yourself to her in ways you've never opened yourself to anyone. She knows your fears, your insecurities, your triggers, your weak points. She knows what words land hardest, what criticism hits deepest, what comparisons sting most. She knows you better than any adversary has ever known you. And when the marriage starts going wrong, all of that knowledge, all of that intimacy becomes available as weaponry, not always consciously, not always maliciously, but the tools are there and they get used. The withheld affection that creates anxiety about whether she still loves you. The silent treatment that forces you to fill the silence with apology for things you may not have even done. The specific criticisms that target the insecurities she's had access to for years. The comparisons to other men designed to make you question your adequacy. Women are emotionally sophisticated communicators. They know which levers to pull. And a woman who has lived with you for years knows your levers better than you know them yourself. This is what men mean when they describe marriage deterioration as feeling like emotional jujitsu. You're being controlled and destabilized through mechanisms you didn't even know existed. And you're experiencing it from someone you trusted completely. Someone whose access to you welcomed. Someone you never imagined would use that access this way. The infidelity suspicion, and then, in marriages that have deteriorated to a certain point, there's the suspicion, the wondering, the late nights at work that seem slightly more frequent lately, the friends you don't know well that she's spending more time with, the phone she's protective of in ways she didn't used to be, the intimacy that's been absent for months while she seems perfectly fine, not depressed, not overwhelmed, just not interested in you specifically. This suspicion is corrosive in a unique way, because you can't raise it without creating enormous conflict that may be entirely unjustified. You can't investigate without violating trust. You can't simply let it go because it won't let you go. So it sits in your mind, coloring everything, adding a dimension of anxiety to an already painful situation. And the worst part is the calculation men make in these moments. Even if I'm right, what do I do with it? If she's already planning her exit, if she already has someone waiting, then the life I've built is already over and I just haven't been told yet. I'm operating in a reality that's already been decided without my participation. That specific helplessness, the sense that decisions about your life are being made without you, that the structure you've built is being dismantled while you're still living in it, is one of the most psychologically damaging experiences a man can have. The trap gets deeper over time. Here's what makes all this particularly cruel. The deeper into the marriage you go, the harder it is to leave. Every year that passes represents another year of financial entanglement, another year of children growing more dependent on the family structure, another year of assets accumulating jointly, another year of your life built so thoroughly around this relationship that extracting yourself requires essentially dismantling everything. It's like the story of getting a massive television into a finished basement. You put it there first, then built the walls around it. And when you realize it needs to come out, there's no way to do it without taking the whole thing apart. You built your life around the marriage. Leaving means taking apart the life you built to extract yourself from it. This is why so many men stay in marriages they regret deeply. Not because they're weak or conflict averse or afraid of change, but because the rational calculation of exit costs is genuinely devastating. Lose half your assets, lose daily access to your children, potentially pay alimony for years, lose your home. Restart financially in your 40s or 50s from a position significantly worse than where you started. Against those costs, the misery of staying seems survivable, so men stay and carry the regrets silently and white-knuckle it through years of a life they didn't want. And the regret becomes such a permanent feature of their inner landscape that they eventually stop recognizing it as regret and just accept it as, this is what my life is. Why you didn't see it coming? And here's the question. Every man in this situation eventually asks, why didn't I see this? Where was this woman when we were dating? The woman I married seemed completely different from the woman I'm living with now, because she was. Not through conscious deception necessarily, though sometimes that too, but through the natural operation of how relationships work. Dating is performance. Both parties show their best selves. The things that become problems later, the entitlement, the friction, the control, the emotional manipulation, the standards nobody can meet, these are present but moderated during courtship. She's invested in attracting you. She's motivated to be pleasant, agreeable, easy to be with. Marriage removes that motivation. Once the commitment is made, once the legal structure is in place, the performance ends and the real person emerges. And for many men, the real person is substantially different from the person they courted. This isn't a cynical observation about women's character. It's a realistic observation about human nature and the conditions under which people modify their behavior. We all perform during courtship. The question is how far the performance diverges from the reality. And for too many men, the divergence is enormous and only becomes visible when there's no longer any incentive to maintain the performance. What can be done? So where does this leave men, both those already in marriages they regret, and younger men trying to navigate this decision wisely? For men considering marriage, build your life first. Build it so solidly, so completely, so thoroughly on your terms that no woman can walk into it and immediately start reshaping it to her specifications. Your financial structure, your living arrangements, your social life, your daily rhythms, all of this should be established and stable before any woman has access to it. Because a man who marries without this foundation is a man who's handing over an unfinished house for someone else to finish, and it won't be finished the way he wanted. Screen with absolute ruthlessness. Not for whether she's pleasant to be around on dates, everyone is pleasant on dates, but for her relationship with money, her level of entitlement, her ability to compromise and take accountability, her relationship with her father, her life history of commitments kept her broken. You're not choosing a companion for a few good years. You're choosing someone who will have legal access to everything you build for as long as the marriage lasts, and potentially beyond it. Do not let biological drive override rational assessment. The male biological drive to pursue attractive women is powerful enough to override judgment in ways that have devastating long-term consequences. The woman who is most physically compelling is often not, the woman who will make a good life partner. These are different qualities. Do not conflate them. Protect yourself legally. Prenuptial agreements are not romantic failures. They're rational protections for both parties that provide clarity about expectations and consequences if the marriage dissolves. Any woman who refuses a reasonable prenuptial agreement is telling you something important about her motivations. And for men already in marriages they regret, the first thing is to stop suffering in silence under the illusion that this is simply the price of being a husband. It may be the price of being married to the wrong woman, or married without sufficient frame, or married under conditions that allowed the relationship to evolve in directions that serve her entirely at your expense. These are addressable things, some of them. Some marriages, with effort and clarity and both parties genuinely committed to change, can be substantially improved. But some can't. And the man who stays in a genuinely destructive marriage out of fear of exit costs, while sacrificing his mental health, his self-respect, his financial future, and his authentic self, that man is paying a price that no amount of avoiding divorce costs justifies. Final thoughts. Marriage as an institution is not inherently wrong or inherently a bad deal for men. Historically, the marriage contract was structured in ways that created genuine mutual benefit. Both parties received things they couldn't easily get otherwise. Both parties had obligations that balanced each other. The deal made sense. Modern marriage has broken that balance. The obligations on men remain. The obligations on women have largely been removed by cultural change that celebrates female independence and options while leaving male obligations untouched. What's left is a structure that extracts significantly more from men than it provides, financially, emotionally, practically, while exposing men to catastrophic downside risk in the form of divorce terms that are systematically unfavorable. This is why men are regretting marriage in the numbers they are. This is why surveys consistently reveal that more than half of married men have experienced significant regret. This is why young men are increasingly declining to participate in the institution at all. They're not making an irrational choice. They're making a rational one based on what they've observed and what they've calculated. I'm not telling men never to marry. I'm telling men to go in clear-eyed about what they're actually agreeing to build sufficient frame before entering, to screen with genuine rigor rather than being led by attraction, to protect themselves legally, and to recognize that the marriage promise and the marriage reality are often very different things, and that the gap between them is where the regret lives. This channel exists because men deserve honest information about these decisions before they make them. Not the romantic narrative, not the cultural pressure, the actual reality of what modern marriage is and what it costs men who enter it without clear eyes. Drop a comment if this resonated with you. If you've experienced this regret, if you're currently in a marriage that looks nothing like what you expected, or if you're a younger man trying to make sense of this decision, share your thoughts so other men know they're not alone. Subscribe because this channel will always tell you what other people won't. The truth about modern relationships, modern marriage, and the choices men face navigating both. Without the romantic gloss, without the cultural pressure, just the honest reality delivered with respect for your intelligence and your right to make informed decisions. Stay healthy.